Welcome to Module 6 of What is it like to adopt a child? Our topic for today is adoption complexities. We will be covering these extra layers of dynamics that occur when you adopt a child. This course is created by the coaches at Growing Intentional Families Together. We are an adoption coaching firm that specializes in adoption education and support because we believe that adoption-attuned parenting grows happier, healthier adoptive families. By now, you have met the rest of the team of coaches you see here. I am Sally Ankerfelt, and it is a pleasure to be with you again and to guide you through this module. If there is one word I would use when talking about adopting a child, I would use the word complex. And I think many adoptive parents and adoptees would agree with me. We are confronted with the adoption complexities right from the beginning of our child's life. Our children have had an experience that was outside of our home. As we make the point here that the prenatal environment matters, I do want to stress that this is not so that we amplify fear, but so that we can increase empathy and awareness. The prenatal environment has actual consequences in all children's brains, including our adoptive children's brains, and in their bodies that impact how children grow, how they learn and behave. The expectant mother, we can assume, has had some challenge in her life in order for her to consider placing her child for adoption. This challenge and her feelings of loss is felt on some level by the child. The stress hormone is passed on to the child, which gives the signal to the child that perhaps they need to be prepared for some stress after they are born. Some of us may be able to relate to this experience even if we were not adopted. I have an acquaintance who wound up having serious complications during the birth of her child and following giving birth, to the point that her life was in balance. Her child arrived into the world, as she describes it, as fearful and anxious. Now that her child is 12, they have been through therapy and they continue to work at managing anxiety. If we can consider this impact of the birthing process on a child, imagine the impact of other stresses and challenges and difficult situations that a child placed in your arms or in your home may have already faced in utero. Having an awareness of the prenatal challenges can bring empathy and skill to your parenting. You are quite likely familiar with the expression nature versus nurture. In fact, you probably wonder which will matter more to your child. Once again, we will assert that the answer is both. We've already mentioned the importance of recognizing the reality that your adopted child's DNA means they arrive with a set of aptitudes, physical traits, and predispositions. These will govern their future development. For example, if your child's body is programmed to be only 5 feet tall, they are unlikely to be a star basketball player. The way you nurture and encourage your child's inclinations will strongly influence how they unfold. Here's another example. If your child's ancestry includes several generations of talented musicians and your family has very little musical inclination, if you never partner with somebody with skills around music, your child's musical gifts may lay dormant. The challenge is to leave room for your child's natural inclinations and to nurture them along. Your home environment, however, and your interests and inclinations can have an impact on your child as well and can be woven into your child's being. The term scientists use to describe this process is epigenetics. The Center for Disease Control .gov describes it this way: epigenetics is a study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence. Unquote. This means that your child will be influenced by you and by your environment, and that those influences will be woven into their natural inclinations. Adoption complexity number 2. Looking back before I adopted children, when I was just beginning the process, I can say, generally speaking, that my experience I have had now as an adoptive parent does not fit into what I originally had thought it would be like, what I believed about it, and what I was told about it. These ideas and presuppositions and beliefs that we have before we adopt can get in the way of approaching adoption with a more nuanced understanding. For instance, I had thought of adoption primarily as a way to help a child in need. At first, my beliefs were that I was giving my love and that my love and care would be the healing balm for the child. This child would thrive in my care. My view on adoption was challenged very quickly, and it was jarring at first. I learned that I was approaching adoption from a save the child mindset that caused me to be unaware of the fact that my child's experiences, their feelings, did not always match my own, and that they did not always view their adoption as a happy event. It can be hard to consider that adoption is painful for our children. Yet, as you have learned from previous modules, adoption includes many losses. If, as adoptive parents, our beliefs and presuppositions go unquestioned, and if we don't challenge ourselves to stay open to new ways of viewing the adoption experience, we can overlook the nuances and complexities of adoption. Just knowing that there is more to adoption than any one of us can grasp will give you space to grow as an adoptive parent, and will give your whole family the space to work on all the twists and turns of being an adoptive family. Let me give you an example of starting off thinking one thing and then being confronted with complexity. To protect the privacy of the family and the child, I've changed some of the details. But a couple of years ago, I got a birth and adoption announcement from a shirt tail relative. This is pretty much what the announcement looked like, except the faces of the adoptive parents were also in the picture holding the baby. Now, when I got the announcement, I noticed, first of all, how beautiful the baby was and how happy the parents were. It really did make my heart sing. It was a joyful announcement. And then I also noticed something interesting, and perhaps you're noticing it now too. I saw that the birth announcement message was worded in a very unique way. It said born and adopted. I wondered how this happened, that this baby could be born and adopted right away on the same day. But I received a personal note from my extended family member shortly after I got the announcement, and I learned that the adoption actually was finalized 4 months after Kay's birth. Let's go a little deeper into this. Beyond these wonderful photos, I was able to get some background on the story of this adoption, and I can share it generally for our purposes today. This is part of what the message said that I received from my shirt tail relative, and I quote, "It was a long process before little Kay came along, but the arrival came quickly with the mother going into premature labor and birth. The mother is from a nearby town, so we were relieved that we only had to travel by car. Everything seems to be going well, despite COVID." Unquote. Now, you can hear in this message, in the adoptive family's response, that natural inclination to see the experience through their eyes, for the prospective adoptive parent's eyes. But then my relative continues, and they say, quote, "But it was heart-wrenching to hear the grief of the mother, what she was going through as she grappled with her decision." Unquote. Can you hear what is happening to these adoptive parents? They started out with the joy that this baby was bringing them, but they were open to seeing that their joyful event was born out of the struggle of their baby's first mother. It's becoming more complex for them right away, but it didn't stop there for this family. I'm going to read something else to you that she wrote, my relative, and they even used the word surprised in their communication with me. This is what they wrote. I quote, "But even surprisingly more than that, the grief of the grandmother. None of us were really prepared for this part of the story. I think it made it harder knowing that that was her only grandson that she would ever have." Unquote. My distant relatives' understanding of adoption, what they thought originally, that they would help a child needing a home, and that they would in turn gain a child, this foundational belief was transformed. What I find interesting is that my relatives were able to open up their foundational beliefs, that they were able to expand their view of adoption to include the experience of the first family. Another choice for them would have been to not factor in the first family's experience, to not even acknowledge their pain. I'm thankful that despite how hard it is when our views are challenged, for the sake of the child, I'm thankful that my relatives allowed themselves to acknowledge and honor the complexity and multi-layers of loss in adoption. Every adoption originates in separation and loss, and not just for the first family. This fracture exacts a lifelong toll on adoptees as well. It will serve you and your child well to never lose sight of this traumatic reality, even while you enjoy the joys and pleasures of loving and raising the children who you adopt. Just as a cloth can be cut into two fragments and then pieced with tiny, nearly invisible stitches, the seam remains as a testimony to the separation that predated the joining. Similarly, as we heard from Coach Sharon when she discussed the adoptee experience, similarly, even when children are securely and deeply attached to their adoptive families, the emotional experience and scars of separation echo throughout their lifetime. Children who are adopted need and care about their birth families and their adoptive families. Both are a permanent part of the adoptee forever. Complexity number 3. Above and beyond the grief adoptees feel being separated from their birth families, they also may feel the grief of losing their place in their first family. This is something that I had not thought much about when I adopted my 3 children. Many adoptees, for example, as some of my children do, have birth siblings. Some adoptees are in the middle of that birth sequence in their first families. So there are children and siblings before them and after them. This can create even more questions about why they are still not with their birth families. They literally and figuratively may wonder about their place in their first families. They also can have some strong emotions about their place in their adoptive families. They may feel out of place and like they have to shape themselves to fit into their adoptive family. This may be especially strong if there are also children who are biological who are being parented. This distinction between relinquishment matters to a child. Both relinquishment, which is the separation of a child from his birth mother, and the adoption, the placement of a child in his new family, can result in trauma. Relinquishment trauma is distinct from the trauma of learning how to adapt into a family. With these thoughts in mind, the decisions that we make with our new child may need more consideration. One such choice is the naming of a child. Consider the impact of renaming that would not include part of the name given at birth, if a name was given. Adoptive parents want to think about these types of decisions in light of the unique circumstance of their child, their beginnings, and the impact of trauma, as well as a way to welcome the child into an adoptive family. I'd like to quote from one of our company's blogs. The blog name is entitled Names, Adoption, and Identity. I quote, "A name can help shape our identity in many ways. It can incorporate traditions, expectations, suggest gender, and or lend itself to bullying. Who hasn't heard of the song A Boy Named Sue? In adoption, names can serve an important part of the claiming process that grafts a child to his or her adoptive family tree. In one of our coaches' family, for example, each of our children have names that extend deep into the history of the family. They were adopted prior to openness in adoption, so there was no knowledge of birth names. A name can serve as a public declaration that a child is part of his or her nuclear adoptive family and their extended family tribe as well. Each time the child's name is spoken, it reinforces this connection. A name can also sustain an important tether to the adopted child's birth family. It's especially important to honor a child's given name, whether he or she is old enough to know it or recognize it or not. Approach these circumstances with empathy. Find a way to blend the child's birth name with the one you have selected. Imagine what it would be like for you if suddenly you were moved to a family, a new home, a new country, the one thing that truly is yours, your name. Imagine that it was stripped away and discarded. This piles trauma on top of trauma. Older children may have strong feelings about maintaining their birth name, blending it, or replacing it with their adopted surname. Have a clear discussion that reveals your child's authentic feelings on the subject. Reassure them that you will be pleased with whatever choice they make. Even for newborns, it is respectful to incorporate a child's heritage in his name. Increasingly, we recognize that adoption is not an either-or relationship. Rather, it is a both-and relationship. The naming process offers an early opportunity to demonstrate respect for our child's roots and to telegraph our acceptance of their presence as an ongoing and important one in our family." Unquote. Naming is just one situation where adoptive parents would want to think about the decision in light of the unique circumstances of their child, their beginnings, and the trauma they've experienced. How to blend all that into the importance of the welcoming and claiming that is also so important for your child's well-being and acceptance into your family. Complexity number 4, the capacity to love. Parents who birth children do not have this layer of complexity to grapple with. I will make that up. I've never birthed a child. But many of the families that we have coached have wondered very secretively, can I love a child not born to me? This is a heavy question, and it is important to be honest with yourself and actually look at the emotions that question might trigger within you. This will enable you to work through it or to confront the truth of it. The truth is, you and your child will not have the common bond of shared biology. Genetic mirroring will be absent. You will not fully see yourself in them, and they will not fully see themselves in you. Commonality and connection will need to be built from other ingredients. Relationships grow over time. Your child who is adopted will be different from the child you may have conceived because you are not their biological parents. Instead, they will be wonderful, uniquely themselves, and they will bring a dose of diversity that can be exciting, interesting, and can enhance your feelings of love. Different and wonderful at the same time. Owning the truth of your feelings helps you identify exactly what those feelings are. Then, if you wish, you can work to modify those feelings through education. But if the truth after all of that is that you doubt that you can love a child not born to you, it is best to know that before an adoption occurs. Otherwise, all of you, the parent and child, might very well feel shortchanged and miserable. A child who feels less than can be devastated. Even more if there are biological children in the home. If a child who is adopted is perceiving to be loved less than the other children, this can have an equally painful impact on a child for a lifetime. Complexity number 5, the information dilemma. The more knowledge you have about your child's family of birth and about your child, the better it is when it comes to making decisions for your child and for general parenting. We've mentioned previously that you want to acquire as much information as possible so you can hold it for your child and include it in their life book, as we mentioned earlier. Most people focus on medical data because they worry about what health issues may arise with their child and they want their child to be informed. You also will want to learn about skills, talents, and things that have run in your child's family so you can encourage their development. You'll want to share this information with your child in age-appropriate ways and times. It is essential that you initiate conversations so that they will hear their story told naturally with love, compassion, and support. This will help them absorb the information, even the hard pieces of their story. It's worth repeating that it is important to be cautious about sharing any specifics of your child's story with others because people can unexpectedly and possibly unintentionally share information with your child in ways that can be harmful or inappropriate. I want to go a little deeper about holding your child's information for them because this is another factor that contributes to the complexity of adoption. In a previous module, we discussed oversharing and understanding that the information we hold belongs to the child. It may be tempting, and I know this for myself, to share details with family and friends because we want them to understand our children. Yet, this is a violation of our children's privacy. On the other hand, sharing important health information with a medical professional or mental health professional who is bound by confidentiality may be necessary. These are examples of sharing about our child on or on behalf of our child. As our child grows, it is vital that they know what is private and what is not private. Using the word private rather than secret can make a huge difference on how our child feels about his or her history and story. A secret implies that there is something to be ashamed of, but private means that only those who have earned the right to know the information can have the information. A secret is something to be hidden that, if discovered, could be damaging or scandalous. But private information is personal to the holder of the information. When we make sure we use the word private rather than secret, this will help circumvent issues of shame that gets tied into secrecy. And keep in mind, again, that once the information is shared with someone else, it cannot be taken back. Sometimes this can have problematic consequences. In Module 5, we looked at secrets from the adoptee's point of view. Now we'll look at the impact of secrecy on you as a parent and on the family collectively. Keeping a secret takes significant energy. Like a boulder submerged in a stream, although unseen, secrets shape how the current flows, just like a boulder would do. Similarly, family secrets divides a family into two segments, those who know and those who don't know. When the secret has to do with your adopted child and you've told other people, but not your child, the information, he or she is often the only one who doesn't know the whole story. It creates a stark situation in which everyone else belongs to a group, those who know, while your child alone belongs to a second group, the one who doesn't know. And the child is sure to sense that emotional distance. Imagine how the child will feel when eventually they discover the secret about themselves. When that happens, the sense of betrayal is deep and pervasive. Often it permanently damages or destroys the family. I have another distant relative, who works in an elementary school as a para. She approached me once at a family event, knowing that I am an adoption coach and work with adoptive families. She told me that everybody in the school is very concerned about a little young boy who is about 10 years old. She said that everybody knows in the school, this is including herself, that he is adopted. But the boy doesn't know, and the parents do not want to tell him. When I heard this situation, I became very sad for that young boy. I stressed to my relative that if there's any way she can talk to the parents about telling their child the truth, all the better. Because if a para at the elementary school and all the other teachers know this child's beginnings and the child does not, can you imagine what will happen when almost 100% positive that child will find out, and it probably won't be from the parents? Can you imagine what kind of damage and trust will occur within that family? I imagine that the family who is deciding not to tell their child that he is adopted, I imagine that they are afraid of what the child will think, feel about them, and probably also they maybe struggle with difficult conversations. It's important to recognize that sometimes feelings of discomfort might cause us to avoid a conversation. But I encourage you to tackle that difficult conversation, to resist the temptation to postpone or avoid. Postponing important yet complicated and awkward conversations leaves kids struggling to figure out how to handle stuff on their own. They then lack the skills and experience to handle it without the guidance of their parents if they're told later on in life. Avoiding the conversations means that you are missing an important opportunity to work on the issue together, to strengthen the trust and confidence that they have in you and that you have in them. Many times, parents who delay difficult conversations discover that putting the discussions off only makes it harder to broach. Sadly, sometimes when parents delay sharing tough information and the kids learn about it on their own, the child can feel deeply betrayed and then question everything about their parent-child relationship. They'll probably ask themselves, what else aren't they telling me? When parents take the proverbial bull by the horns and open the difficult conversations, the family benefits. It increases empathy and awareness and trust. And here's another benefit of the boundaries around information and also having difficult conversations with your children. First of all, when we set and hold and honor boundaries around information and who deserves to know, whether it be medical professionals, friends, or family, we are helping our children learn how to set boundaries around their information as well. And when we are open and when we tackle difficult conversations with our children, we are teaching them not to be afraid of hard topics and to take the chance to talk about them with trusted people. We are giving our children lifetime skills. Some of you may become a transracial family where the race of your new child is different from your own. Our society has created race, and it has become an integral aspect of a person's being. It influences how the world views us and responds to us. It shapes how we experience the world. It touches our sense of self and often sculpts our tastes and preferences. An adoptee who is adopted transracially wants their race to be appreciated and respected, not ignored. Imagine if the situation were reversed and it was you that would be different. Recall a time when you entered a space where you were the odd person out. Perhaps it was not your race. Maybe it was your clothes, your gender, your age, your appearance. It likely left you feeling awkward and like you stood out. Maybe you also felt anxious, judged, inferior, or otherwise on unsteady ground. Most likely, you were glad to be able to step out of this pressured interaction. Now consider that for your child who would be adopted transracially. Much of their lives may be spent navigating a gap between belonging and fitting in, of being proud of their difference and wondering how they can function as one of the only ones. Only when they are in circumstances where they are not the only one will they be relieved of the weight of being a different race. So intentionally commit to sharing the burden of differences. Be the odd one out occasionally yourself. When your child tells you about experiencing an instance of racism, believe it. More importantly, don't doubt, dismiss, or make excuses for other people's bad behavior. Validate your child's experiences. Reinforce their sense that you value race by building relationships with people of your child's race. Be aware that your presence or your absence influences your child's experiences. Some people will treat your children respectfully when you are present and unkindly when you are not. Engage with your child's ancestral food, music, and other interests. Learn the history of your child's race in America. Live with the recognition that you are a multiracial family. Share that burden of blending into other racial contexts so that it isn't your child that is doing the adapting. This gives them a chance to rest in the ease of belonging and the comfort of being among people of their own race. If you adopt transracially, consider the demographics of your friendship circle, your neighborhood, your schools, the professionals you patronize. Also, be aware of your family's attitudes about other races. How does their stance show up in their conversations, humor, belief systems? How might these shape the way they treat and talk about your children? Validate your children's experiences if they tell you someone was treating them differently or unfairly because of their race, especially if it is a family or a friend. Please do not minimize or make excuses. Don't be tempted to give your loved ones a pass. Instead, prioritize your child's emotional health over the comfort of unenlightened people. Be compassionate, a witness to your child's story. Be an advocate. Stand up for your child's racial identity. Speak out in the face of racism. Don't exclusively work behind the scenes. Let your kids see you being in their corner. If you remain silent in such situations, your kids will likely draw two inferences, neither one of which is positive. One, they will believe that you agree with what is being said, or two, they will see you as preferring not to rock the boat over choosing to stand up for them. Encourage mentor relationships for your child and for yourself with people who are part of your child's world. Develop meaningful reciprocal relationships with people of your child's race and culture. Learn how to care for your child's body, mind, and spirit in terms of race. Once you adopt transracially, like I mentioned, you become a multiracial family for life. You will be called upon to take action for the sake of your child. Many of you have probably heard of the concept of colorblind parenting. Perhaps you may see it as a preferred approach when parenting transracially. Time and lived experience has proven that colorblind parenting is not an approach that serves children well. Parenting as if race doesn't exist devalues and overlooks this essential aspect of a child, and it can leave the child feeling like a parent doesn't actually see his or her true self, as if the child can only be accepted and loved if their racial difference is erased, made invisible, and denied. But race is a defining factor in a transracial adoptee's life, and it matters. It is an overt feature that is visible to all, and it can be a frequent barrier to belonging and acceptance by extended family, friends, classmates, the general public. Racism can be subtle. It's not always loud or obvious. Leslie Booker's presentation entitled Embodying Racial Presence, Awareness of Race, Culture, and Self in Healing Trauma issues a call for people to consider the result of dismissing the impact of racism. She says, "Imagine if your experience was negated, that something you knew to be true about yourself, your humanity. You're told that it wasn't true, or that it might be your imagination. Can you imagine that happening for generation after generation after generation? Imagine instead what might happen if we lean towards this experience so we could have greater understanding of how some folks move through this world, so that we could ally, so that we could be a friend, so that we could be a comrade to this person. The simple act of acknowledging that something has happened is an act of love and care, of leaning towards our own humanity and our vulnerability." End quote. Adoption complexity number 7. Special considerations in certain adoption types. Adopting a sibling group can bring additional complexities. For instance, there may be established dynamics among the sibling group where one sibling sees him or herself as responsible for the well-being of the others, the one who has kept all others safe or made decisions for the rest of their siblings. This child may, quote, own the role of parent, and the younger siblings may defer to that, quote, parent sibling for their direction and needs. If an adoptive parent too quickly attempts to assert their authority as parents, the children may actually close ranks and resist forming bonds with the new parents. Parenting a sibling group requires an awareness of these dynamics and a lot of patience with the knowledge that the family feeling of their new family may take months to years to develop. And if you are considering adopting a child from foster care, even at a young age, these children will have a history that will include challenging circumstances. This will have shaped them in some way into the person they are today, and that may impact their behaviors and the way they see the world. For example, they may see the world as being unpredictable or unsafe. The repercussions of these events in their early life will influence how receptive a child will be towards adoptive parents. Their instincts for self-protection most likely will be strong. Staying aloof may feel safer to them than allowing themselves to let their emotional walls down. The bonding and attachment process most likely will be slow and convoluted. The child's social worker will be seeking an adoptive family that would be a good match for that child. They will be looking at the personalities of both the children and the prospective parents. For instance, it's not uncommon for social workers to be looking for families who possess what seems to be two opposite skills: flexibility and structure. What they are looking for in this situation is a parent who can create predictable schedules, for example, and hold to those schedules while also being able to change a parenting technique when it is not working. Clichés, fables, and myths endure because they hold a kernel of truth, or they satisfy a need for a simple view of very complex situations. However, that core truth is often obscured by layers of distortion, exaggeration, and outright falsehoods. When adoption myths obscure the truth, they can cause harm, even if no harm was intended. For example, when cultural mythology portrays adoption as totally benign, it dismisses the reality of adoption loss and grief. When myths minimize the emotional pain adoptees feel without being with their original families, their pain does not go away. It is internalized, and then adoptees must struggle without support. This causes adoptees additional suffering that leaves them feeling invisible, objectified, and invalidated. They can feel compelled to pretend that all is well, when the reality is far different. So why do adoption myths persist? First, people find comfort in the reassurance they offer, and they want them to be true. This serves both our culture, which knows adoption only in the abstract, but it also serves adoptive parents. We as adoptive parents naturally want to believe that we can be everything our children need. Myths reinforce that belief system, and it can calm our fears and reassure us as adoptive parents that our families will fulfill all our dreams about parenthood. Cultural myths advance the idea that children can be separated from one family and grafted to another with little or no suffering. This is inaccurate. Adoption is not totally benign. It's not a painless experience. We as adoptive families live a truth that is far more complex. Adoption creates a life interrupted and realigned for the adoptee. It separates their lives into two sections: before they were adopted and after they were adopted. When the myth overrides or denies reality, children and families suffer. It imposes a level of denial that transforms relationships from genuineness into role playing, and it complicates the adoptive family's ability to build healthy, reciprocal, loving connections, because it overlays reality with a fantasy of wishful hope. So instead of jointly working through the tough stuff of adoptive family life, these myths pretend that those issues do not exist. Two of the most popular myths that come to mind is love is enough, which is one I hinted at the beginning of this module, and another one is if we adopt our child as a baby or toddler, they won't experience grief, loss, or trauma. Instead of these myths, adoptive parents and families can learn how to embrace the reality. The reality is that both birth and adoptive parents are real, that the relationships that bind them are real. I would like to read an excerpt from a blog from Growing Intentional Families Together entitled, "Time is a River That Flows Forward." As adoptive families, we must deal in reality. Real family, real children, real parents, birth and adoptive, real challenges, real acceptance, real loss, real grief, real commitment, real connection. Acceptance our best gift to our children means we see, hear, and know them for who they truly are. We make it clear that they need not be a sanitized or artificial version of themselves. Reassure our kids in words and actions that we love them. Affirm not only the ways they are like us, but also the wonderful and unique ways in which they are different. Their uniqueness enriches our family trees. Use our practice of intentionality to grow closer as a family, to nurture attachment, empathy, and self-reliance." Unquote. So what else can we do as adoptive parents to create happy, healthy adoptive families and children? Well, we can plan personal and family goals that are steeped in our core values and that include the values of our children as well. We can live our daily lives as a learning conversation. We can constantly model how this adoption paradigm looks in action. This means acknowledging shortfalls, identifying what may have gotten in the way, and then getting back into the flow with renewed resolve. Life is full of white water rafting, we can say, and it takes courage and skill to remain steady through the turbulence until we can reach the calm water again. We can show our children that whatever we encounter together as a family, we can remember that we can get through it and that we can keep on paddling. Now that is what I call real. Now let's glean some more understanding from my colleague, Coach Sharon, who is an adoptee. I quote from Sharon: "Aside from the fact that your adoptee is a child that you have come to know and love, the adoptee you are holding, if they are at the infant stage, or the adoptee you are speaking with because the child has grown to be able to clothe and groom themselves, this child is a human with other roles in life which can require their interest and curiosity. If they are your first child and have not yet reached 1 year old, they will not likely need to be interested in other family members. However, there are some characteristics you may need to look out for as your baby matures. If you have adopted an older child, there may be other factors that you should consider as your child deals with their identity. Additionally, if siblings are in the makeup of your family, there is always sibling rivalry, and it doesn't matter if your child connects through DNA, it's always present. If you have had biological children and choose to adopt a sibling to expand your family, this combination will provide a new set of challenges that can wreak havoc. Finally, there is the biological family to consider, because they are intricately involved in your family unit. Their positioning and sibling rivalry has a group of concern that can trigger your adoptee. Let's consider how this influences your relationship with your child. Sharon invites us to ask a powerful question. She says, "How should I approach my adoptee when rejection appears within parenting, and how do I parent siblings?" You may recall how we spoke of the fear of rejection in Module 5. The sense of the loss, which can be conscious and unconscious, comes with the adoption landscape and can become an integral part of your child's behavior from infancy to maturity. Parenting can be challenging because these characteristics can be displayed in anger, aloofness, lack of interest, and other behaviors that can encompass mistrust. It will require extra effort to gain trust and a special allowance that allows adoptees to exert control. Parents need to watch out for self-defense mechanisms when their attachment issues crop up. The adoptee may accept one parent and reject the other. It helps to maintain routines, meet the adoptee's needs, and maintain your caregiving relationship. Siblings can complicate matters for adoptive parents. These challenges become evident as a child matures. In our home, there were 5 adopted children who did not share DNA, and there was an ever-present competition to gain attention. Developing and maintaining your family system and core values help to maintain order and develop supportive relationships. When adopted children come into a home where there are biological children, there may be jealousy on the part of biological children, which can undermine relationships because all the attention and support is afforded to the newest arrival. It's important to remember to share your time equally while you develop attachments with your adoptee. If you adopt an older child, you may observe some challenges around the adoptee's fear of never seeing their birth family again. Often, children need to maintain relationships with the family of birth. It's important to maintain contact with birth parents and siblings. This is true at all levels of adoption, from infants to children who have matured and are independent of your family. No matter the age of the child at the time of adoption, there will be unexpressed thoughts around the influence their separation had on their parents and a piqued curiosity around the siblings. It is important to handle the opportunities to support your adoptee with curiosity and love." Unquote. Now that you've completed Module 6, we offer you some conversation questions, either writing them down for yourself or sharing them with a trusted individual. After completing this module, what are you thinking about the most? What aspect of this module surprised you and why? How will you put what you learned in this module into action? And some final closing thoughts from each of us at Growing Intentional Families Together. I say there is more to being an adoptive family than meets the eye. Simply acknowledging this fact is the start to a healthier family. Sharon says, the adoptee may face the complexity of understanding their identity. Parents may see this confusion when behaviors appear to represent mistrust. Susan says, while it's natural for parents to think of their children as gifts and themselves as lucky, it can have a more negative connotation for adoptees. Gail says, understanding and acknowledging the complexities of adoption helps parents to connect more authentically with their child. Coach Gail looks forward to guiding you through Module 7, where you will be looking at yourself as an adoptive parent. If you would like to go deeper into the topics we discussed in this module, we entrust to you the references that you see here. Congratulations in completing Module 6, and we will see you in Module 7.